Well, welcome everybody to our webinar, Enhancing Security Through Master Planning. And just to go over a couple of housekeeping items. If you can, please include your company name after your personal name on your avatar. If you're not speaking, please stay muted. And if you have any questions during the meeting, during the webinar, please feel free to type those into chat and I will make sure we get to those before the end of our Q&A. We are recording the webinar, both to share back with all of you who attend or anyone who's registered, as well as for our marketing purposes. And if you can, take a moment and at the end of the webinar, provide a little bit of feedback for us. I did also paste this link into the chat at the top of the chat. We would love to hear your feedback about how the webinar went today so we can continue to refine our webinar format and topics. So let's introduce Absco. We are a highly experienced fire life safety and security system integrator, specializing in effective solutions for customers with large and complex environments. We have a great team of certified technicians, and we have over 45 years of experience in the industry. Here are some of the services that we offer. We pretty much cover the full gamut of fire life safety and security integration. We have a fantastic sales team with Mr. Morgan Campbell here out of our Linwood office, Chad Smith over in Spokane, Teresa Gross in Wilsonville, and Andrew Fletcher also down in our Oregon department. And newer to our team is Amy Stafford, who is our service department manager. And our speakers today are our very own CEO, Erick Slabaugh. Erick has, over 37 years of experience with Absco and has a huge amount of expertise in guiding organizations through their security challenges, has done a lot of master planning himself. And then Cheryl Michaels, we are so happy to have her on board with us today. Cheryl's the Director of Safety and Security at Seattle Pacific University and oversees all the campus security operations, and as well is the co-owner of a security consulting firm, Educational Safety LLC. So we're super excited to have Cheryl and Erick presenting on this topic for us today. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Erick. Erick, you are in control now. You are muted.
Every time I go to turn on my camera, it seems to hover over something else. Let me see if I can apologize for that, guys. Shan, if you can turn my camera on, it'd be great. But here we go. So the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today. It's an ancient Chinese proverb. It's very appropriate. One of the big challenges we see with master planning is oftentimes people don't do it until the day after the worst day they could possibly have. And that is definitely the wrong time to do life safety and security master planning. And Jen, there we go. Security master planning is really putting together a detailed outline of an organization's overall risk assessment, the mechanisms by which to address the risk assessment. And that includes a whole number of things from, how are we going to detect what is going on? How are we going to communicate with our community? How are we going to make the environment safer when adverse events happen? And really assessing what is the list of adverse events that our particular facility might encounter. It oftentimes takes multiple years and multiple budget cycles to fully implement a effective master plan. Master plan should include things like maintenance cycles, processes and procedures, training, and testing of the systems and the team members that engage with it. It also involves drilling the community to make sure that people know how to respond appropriately when adverse events happen. Oh, that one did twice. There we go. Too often security planning starts immediately. Yeah, fire ready aim. Too often it happens the day after the worst event. I've had multiple facilities come in and say, what could you do with millions of dollars tomorrow to address our issue? And it's really the wrong question. The right question is, what should we be doing today with an appropriate budget to address real issues and real concerns that we have? And how can we do that effectively, and not just address the issues that we're facing, but address broader issues in the community, making the community safer, but also enhancing operational efficiency and effectiveness. I'm going to turn this over to Cheryl. Cheryl?
Good morning.
Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm glad to join this conversation because preparing for the worst events is one of my passions. It's an important thing that we're able to do as security managers, directives, vice presidents, those of us with a duty for care of our community. When it comes to active attacks, we think about preparing for those and recognize that it has been 25 years since Columbine occurred. And yet in those 25 years, I can share that the majority of schools have not done any investment in preparing for an event. And in truth, it's because no one quite believes that it's going to happen to them. There is a cost to not preparing on the front end. Thank you. Security investment on the front end seems pretty expensive. It seems like a long-term, and it should be a long-term investment. And so many institutions don't prioritize the security infrastructure that needs to be in place because they don't believe an event will happen. After an event occurs, the cost, just monetary alone, is huge. Virginia Tech spent $11.4 million on their security technology and upgrades in the year following the shooting. When we look at other schools, Sandy Hook spent $50 million building a new state-of-the-art elementary school following the shooting. Prior to the shooting, their security technology and their security planning was some doors that could be locked, but their security plan was that a janitor or custodian would go around in an active shooter event and lock all of the classroom doors because that was how they had been set up to do that. If we took a look at another school, let's say Parkland and Robb Elementary, they're estimating around $25 million following the event. And this would involve security upgrades, lawsuits, etc. I think the last number I saw is that Robb Elementary alone was close to 100 million in just security infrastructure upgrades. And Uvalde, they're estimating 27 billion for security upgrades, for their lawsuits, etc., that they have spent. Next one. In 2014, Seattle Pacific University, where I work, experienced an active shooter attack. When we look at preparing for such a thing, it's really hard to wrap your head around, like this is a possibility of what could happen. But when you're going to integrate all of your security infrastructure in preparing for such an event, you have to be ready to believe it's going to happen. So in 2007, Virginia Tech was SBU's what I call a crystal ball moment. The moment that, as institutionally, we saw what happened at Virginia Tech and accepted and believed that we could experience that at SVU. So we began a multi-year plan. Our master plan, if you will, is Erick has described this, a security master plan, to build out an infrastructure that would help us address, plan for, respond to, and recover from an active shooter event. So from our security operations, which is kind of the hub that we designed, we created an infrastructure that allows us to do many things, beginning with the slide, the ability to physically lock down our entire campus. So the summer after Virginia Tech, our classroom lockdown was very similar to what Sandy Hook saw. So we began that summer a complete overhaul of our physical lockdown ability with our push button locks and replaced them with an ANSI grade 1 lock set. We also implemented a multi-year plan to convert to card access, that gave us the ability to lock the entire campus down with the push of a button. Next one. We upgraded and enhanced our video surveillance for the entire campus. So I think over in those 10 years, we probably on a 40-acre campus were around close to 400 cameras at the time of the shooting. And the video surveillance really allows you to capture some real-time intelligence of what's going on in the location where it's the shooting event is happening. It also allows you to capture information following the event that assists in the trials that will come. We developed a multimodal message delivery system, and this is very important because getting your message out at the moment to your campus community and what protective actions you want them to take is critically important for your saving lives. Getting the message out through as many means as possible to tell your community what actions do you want them to take, considering whether that's lockdown or that the campus community that police are on their way. These are the messages that we send out through a system that sends a cell phone, text, email. We have a loudspeaker system that we've installed. We have reader boards across campus that scroll messages, and we have a software system that takes over the entire campus managed desktops to communicate the same pre-scripted messaging. We developed an unarmed security officer response protocol. Many institutions will be told that there is nothing unarmed security can do in response to an active shooter event. And yet so many institutions do have unarmed security operating their physical security programs. So we developed a program, a protocol, if you will, that allows our officers to position themselves in safe locations where they can collect information about what's happening inside, what's happening as people evacuate, directing those individuals to safe locations, and meeting law enforcement when they arrive so that we can hand over keys to the building, cards that will open and unlock doors as they move through the building, maps that are layouts of the building, and sharing information that we've collected from our dispatch center, which is relaying our video surveillance information, as well as information we've learned from those who evacuated from the location. And we developed our security operations response protocol as well. There are many things a dispatch center needs to do when the call comes in that shots have been fired on your campus. Limiting how much time you spend on each of the steps is critical to saving lives. So we developed our own internal protocol that allows us to go from the moment of detection to putting the campus into lockdown, to activating our loudspeakers and sending out our other multimodal emergency communications, alerting our security officers of the location, and calling 911. I have 19-year-old dispatchers that train to do all of those activities in less than a minute because crime time is absolutely essential in these moments. We also invested heavily in campus-wide training. So many institutions may do a drill that affects just a part of an organization. Schools and other institutions will maybe just do a tabletop or a small drill with their security department. What SBU really committed culturally is a campus-wide lockdown drill and a campus-wide evacuation drill that occur one each every year, where every activity on campus, from classrooms to lectures to offices, daily business, shut down for just that period of time so that we can practice what the safety protocols are, given the type of drill that we're conducting. And the last thing we did was we built and developed our continuity planning. Getting back to normal is essential for an organization to sustain and survive after an event, but it's also really important for the resiliency of your campus community, for the individuals who have been affected. Building in your recovery plans will address things like psychological first aid and ongoing counseling so that you can address not just the trauma that those immediately in the area were affected by, but the trauma experienced by those in the community, what I call vicarious trauma. So, as I said, SBU's crystal ball moment was in 2007 with Virginia Tech. And our university leadership came to believe that that could happen here. And they asked the question, what could we do to begin getting ready right now? What could we do this summer? They offered the security director and I at the time $2 million to implement over that summer all of the technology that we would need to have in place that I've identified that we had at the time of the shooting. But we said, no, thank you. That really isn't the strategic plan that I think best suits our community. Our plan was to invest $2 million by dividing it by 10 years. So we invested $200,000 a year over the next 10 years. Now, the shooting occurred within 7, but we had achieved probably 99% of what we had set out to achieve when we began the plan in 2007. So you might ask, what after the shooting, what was the cost that we spent after the shooting? Could you go back a second? Thank you. SBU, because of its investment on the front end of $2 million, and actually we hadn't quite gotten there because it was our 10-year plan and it was 7 years in. A good estimate for what SBU spent after was $500,000. We remodeled the building where the shooting took place. We took care of the medical costs for the individuals who were injured. We covered a lot of things in just our continuity planning. So what was the total cost in lawsuits that we had after the shooting? Because that is a large cost to the active shooter events that individuals who don't prepare for it spend. Well, actually, SBU spent 0 on lawsuits. We weren't sued by anyone following our active shooter event. That doesn't mean that that isn't possible, but I think it demonstrates that when you put in the time, effort, and monetary investment on the front end, you are better prepared on the back end to spend less. I often get asked, how much did SBU spend institutionally for security improvements after the shooting attack? And I can honestly say that none of the enhancements that we did in the year or years following were a result of the active shooter event. Everything we did were continued and planned enhancements to the security master plan that we had in place, that we had started in 2007. It's really important for us to understand that when we're in denial, we don't believe it can happen to us, that we're not going to change. But we have to change because the cost of not changing becomes too great. Not just monetarily, as I've described today, but the cost in lives, you can't put a number on that. And we have a duty in our field to protect lives. Eric, I'm going to hand this back over to you now.
Cheryl, thank you so much. And thank you for being here today and sharing SPU's experience. Again, Cheryl quoted Nelson Mandela earlier, and it's absolutely true. The challenge is if we don't believe it could possibly happen, the things that we will never address it. I found it very interesting. Right after the shooting at Seattle Pacific University, I was asked to talk to a number of different universities around the state. And in speaking with one of them, I asked just a normal question that we always ask: can your campus go into lockdown if there were an active shooter or major emergency event? And could you communicate with your team? And what I was told was our access control system doesn't do lockdown, but that's okay because we're a gun-free zone. Absolutely fascinating that anybody could have that mentality. Jen, if you can advance us, I'm going to apologize. There we go. So there are really a couple of keys here. One is developing a true risk assessment, and risk assessments are not something that should be done once and set it and forget it. It's really something that should be done on an ongoing basis. How has the environment changed? What new threats do we need to take into consideration in the way we address our system build out and our process build out and our training and our drilling? And how do we make sure that that aligns with organizational objectives? And again, oftentimes a few dollars spent wisely can have significant improvements in operational efficiency. I know that one of the things that that SPU did really well was use its access control system to give its student body access to labs and things that normally they wouldn't get access to, because normally with a locked key, they're just going to be locked. But if you're in that class, why don't we give you access to that class? There's some really interesting things that you can do with the various systems, access control, video surveillance, et cetera. And especially when they work in an interoperated, integrated fashion. Strategy development's next. We need to make sure that we've got the right personnel, that we've identified the appropriate technology. We want to have technology that is not going to end of life, that is scalable, that can meet the needs, and that is adaptable to future unknown threats and concerns. We want to make sure that we're integrating both the physical and the digital security measures to make sure that we don't have cybersecurity issues. And again, we want to put it into a master schedule, starting with the threat assessment, looking at it from the standpoint of what is the doomsday event, what is that extinction event that we need to address. We want to make sure that we've developed effective security standards that explain why we are doing what we're doing. And that we're integrating that into our operations, our processes and procedures, and our training. Jan, if you can advance us, I am going to apologize. I am not getting control at the moment. Okay, so really what we want to look at is a sliding scale. And the sliding scale, it could be 1 to 100, it could be whatever you want it to be. But, what is the likelihood that an event's going to happen? And what is the severity if it does? The likelihood that it's going to rain in the Northwest is really high. The likelihood that somebody's going to die from rain is not very high. And the severity of it happening, the severity of people getting rained on is not something to address. It's just a normal part of living in the Northwest. But from that, we have other events that we can start to scale. What is the potential of a major power outage? What is the potential of a chemical spill? What is the potential of, and while the likelihood may be low, the significance of that event happening may be extremely high. And so we need to take measures to address those in a proactive fashion. Jen, go ahead. We're going to send this out to everybody. There's a laundry list of questions that should be asked, but things like, how do we manage people coming onto our site? And by the way, these particular items are not just specific to an educational facility environment. We need to plan in our working environments, wherever we work, what is our security protocols? What happens if we have a disgruntled employee who shows up with a gun? How do we address that? How do we make the facility safer at the push of a button to limit access? And, if you've been around this long enough, you've heard the term the onion. How do we give layers to the onion to increase safety and security and minimize the number of people impacted by an adverse event? Who handles the workplace violence? Who has the right to speak to it? Who's trained on it? And training is not something you do with a manual that people have to look through in the middle of a crisis. In the middle of a crisis, we don't have time to read a manual to get things up and running and to do the right thing. And that's why, as Cheryl spoke to, getting it to the point that the team can do a number of actions that are critical in the moment within a minute, and automating as much as possible and making it as easy as possible allows people to be more effective. When we're under stress, the amount of information that we can take in starts to narrow. And that's why fighter pilots have that checklist on their thigh, that when things are going wrong, when the engine's going, whatever, they have a checklist that's really short. It's not the keep your eye on all of the instruments, it's do these 5 things. It's really important to know what those 5 things are in your environment when there's an emergency. Jen, if we can go ahead. Love the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's an ancient African proverb. I think it's really valuable. It's really good to know who are your constituencies in your environment that we need to engage with to ensure that we're addressing all of the critical issues. Oftentimes people have information, and information is valuable as to who is a risk to a campus or workplace. Who is that person who is not handling things well, and that we might want to get in front of before it becomes an issue. Let's make sure we set SMART goals, things that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, that we are evaluating what resources do we have in a reasonable time frame. Far too often, people will throw a really big number the day after an adverse event, but really these systems take maintenance, and these systems take forethought. And done right, these systems get implemented as buildings are remodeled, as new buildings are built, and they're implemented in a fashion that integrates into a holistic plan at far less cost than if we just go in and try and take over a building or a campus wholesale at the end of a day. How can we make things better without spending a fortune? And it takes a lot of forethought to do that. Oftentimes it takes infrastructure to do that. So when we're remodeling, putting in extra infrastructure is hugely valuable. Let's make sure we're involving the executive management team early, understanding budgets and helping them to understand the budgeting cycle, and that this needs to be a cultural shift to managing risk and assessing risk, not just something that when it happens, we throw dollars at. Where we can, let's demonstrate a return on investment to enhance the dollars that we do have and show that we're stewarding our resources well. Go ahead, Jen. Again, as we're developing our strategy, understanding the technology that we choose makes a huge difference. Understanding whether or not the product's reliable or if it's brand new and we don't have any idea whether or not it'll work. Making sure that we've built something that is scalable, that it's flexible and adaptable to changing environments, and that we're using innovation in a responsible way. I will say this, oftentimes being at the front and forefront of technology means taking a risk that things don't work quite as well as we intended them to. But technology's come a long ways over the last 25, 30 years when it comes to this field. Video surveillance using AI for video analytics has enhanced our ability to be responsive. Gunshot detection, weapons detection in general, getting ahead of it and addressing it at the front door rather than in the middle and heart of our operations can be hugely valuable and critical. We have a number of medical facilities that we're working with right now that are implementing something very similar with gunshot detection. Again, as we go through the, Jen, I don't know what we're doing. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead and go to the next one. We're good. Thank you. Okay. It's really important to develop those security processes and policies that allow us to identify what it is we're addressing and why. I know that one of the universities that we worked with had a requirement that anytime they put in a emergency call box, that there was a camera associated with that call box so that they could see when somebody pushed that button. Was it somebody playing a prank? Was it a real event? If nobody communicated on the other end of that box, was there still an emergency, or was it somebody just, pushed it and ran off? In one instance, I know that there was a young man that was saved because a mentally ill individual attacked him with a knife and nicked his aorta. But he was able to push a button, an emergency call button. And as he was going to ground, a camera came up and they saw a pool of blood and were able to dispatch an aid car immediately before anybody went over to investigate why was nobody responding on the other end. So things like that can make a huge difference. That just became part of their standard policy and process and became part of the culture of how they implemented systems. Again, go ahead, Jen, to the next one. We want to make sure that we're evaluating on an ongoing basis, that we're looking at our plan. We've just done this with a major facility in the Seattle area. Most of us love it because some of the sports teams play there, but where it's what needs to be revised to accommodate the future. Where are we? What do we need to change? And what processes and procedures need to be enhanced or revised? And so again, it's keep a continuous cycle of plan, do, review, and revise. We need to make sure that we understand what our KPIs are. Are we able to reduce incidents? Where do we see an increase in incidents? What do those incidents have to do with? What might we do to address them and to reduce them? Sometimes it's addressing human behavior. Are there individuals that we need to get in front of before they become a problem? Sometimes it's enhancing security. Sometimes it's changing a process or a procedure. But again, making sure that we're on that ongoing continuous cycle. Jen, go ahead. Need to make sure that our evaluation and reassessment, as we continue to look at the feedback loop, are there new constituencies that we need to bring in and speak with that have new information? The new building that's being built, is there anything in particular that we need to protect? And by the way, protection is both life and property and intellectual property. And how are we going about doing that? Some of that gets into effective documentation, legal, and a whole host of other things. It's not just life safety and security. And it's not just physical, and it's not just cyber, but it's looking at the totality of what it is we need to protect for an organization that is going to give them a positive return and peace of mind. And at the end of the day, will allow us to make things better in the worst possible circumstances. Jen, go ahead. I love this saying as well. It is astonishing what we can achieve if we don't care who gets the credit. At the end of the day, one of the things I love about Cheryl is, and I think we share this, as long as people make their sites better, as long as they make their systems better, and as long as they give themselves a real chance to address the worst day in a meaningful way, and they're not putting blinders on, whatever we can do, would love to help. But with that, I think we're going to go to Q&A. Am I right, Jen?
You are correct.
Yay.
What questions do we have out there? I have not gotten any in the chat yet. So we can take from the audience. Anybody have some questions?
So hey, this is Chad. We've got one of my customers who's actually an engineer designer. Nathan is on the call today. I'm curious from when somebody is a kind of a part of a team, or somebody who has a voice but doesn't have direct contact or a direct influence, or an influencer, How would you advise somebody like Nathan who helps design systems from customers when he sees a situation that's like, hey, what have you guys thought about some of the things we've been talking about? If he sees a hole, like how do you go about when you're not a stakeholder? Is there any advice that you guys have that might help someone who's a third party engineer type that might be able to have a conversation and help start something? Is it just question and asking? Have you thought about how would you advise that?
Cheryl, as an end user, I would love to hear your thoughts on the best way for an influencer to ask critical questions who doesn't control the purse strings and who is not the customer.
So, and I'm reflecting on my experience. I know others have had success with different ways. First, I take the approach that changing minds takes a lot of time. That it is a lot of planting seeds and finding the right opportunities to plant seeds. Because I joined SVU in 2001, and it was 2007 when maybe the light bulb went off, right? So finding having those regular conversations, sending an email when some national event occurs, that just like, hey, there was an active shooter at Sandy Hook, there was an active shooter at this. Oh, this school was able to prevent an active shooter attack because they locked their doors. Those kind of conversations. Finding the individuals who make budgeting decisions and talking with them about their budget cycles and how they identify their priorities. In talking to the facilities director. If your facilities director or your IT person isn't a believer, I think the first thing you need to do is work on that relationship so that you help them become believers, because they can be barriers to your implementation process. So you start by building that relationship across your institution with the individuals who will repeat maybe the things that you're saying. So you aren't in the room when the facilities director is talking to the VP of finance about what their institutional capital investment plan is for the year. But if you've been having conversations with the facilities director, it goes a long ways when the facilities director starts repeating your talking points. When they're on board and they start saying, well, we think we ought to include more cabling capability, more Ethernet or whatever. Sorry, I'm not the techie, but whenever you want to build it out, you want to, if they're on board, then they're starting to also build into some future planning, or maybe you can negotiate it. Hey, is there room, if you're considering this, can we upgrade our loudspeaker system? We already have a loudspeaker system. Can we do more? And then also I found it very influential to have tabletop exercises at the highest level, and then also broadly across the institution. So I think one of the most influential tabletop exercises I did was I did an active shooter tabletop exercise for our vice presidents and president. I invited our constituents, the other partners of other agencies, our precinct captain, his command staff, the battalion chief for the fire department and their command staff, anybody that counselors in the area, or the emergency manager for the state's emergency management office. They were included and also helped give presentations. So by using their credibility, I was able to kind of acquire that and say, here's how we could apply it here at SVU. This is what we're looking at. This is the reality of what we'd be facing. That was actually done a few years before the Virginia Tech happened. And I think that those were tremendous amounts of seeds that we had placed in their minds and hearts. And so when Virginia Tech happened, institutionally, they were ready to go and act on it. Kind of a rambling
Cheryl.
answer. Hope that gave you
No,
something.
Cheryl, I think that was a great answer. I would concur that the number one thing as an influencer that we need to do, and when we're brought in, is identify who's going to be the advocate for the initiative, and how do we help them advocate and gain additional advocates and ambassadors for the initiative, and start moving farther and farther up the executive food chain. You know, as a CEO, I am responsible for the safety of my people in our working environment. I just am. And there's some new codes that are proposed for NFPA and other things that would indicate that, you know, we better have a plan for some of these things, for active shooter and things of that nature, workplace violence. And so increasingly it will happen by mandate that people care. And the lawsuits will will continue to pile up. Again, the Uvalde number it's crazy. Again, it's an extinction event when something like that happens. And so,
Eric,
yes,
Eric, to your comment about the NFPA. So nothing will, some of the best conversations with your facilities can happen around your fire system and your controls. And NFPA 3000 with their life safety code, I don't know if that's where some of the changes occurring. It's not law, but those recommendations, when you can start having that conversation, look for those things that are the bridge between something like fire code that's already driving a lot of your infrastructure, and bridge that to security measures. I think that's a great avenue to start the conversation from that perspective.
Yeah, especially when we've got resistance from people. And I agree with you that the IT director or CIO, huge, they're either going to be an advocate or they're going to be an impediment. But there is no neutrality usually with that role when it comes to these systems.
Any other questions?
Chad, did we get you taken care of?
Yes, thank you, sir. And for those institutions that maybe don't feel like they have the talent, skill, knowledge base, what resources or professionals can assist in developing and executing a security master plan?
Oh, I mean, obviously we can assist with that, Chad, and legitimate question, but there are a whole number of engineering firms and consultants that specialize in master planning. The challenge is how many of them specialize in security and life safety master planning. That's a whole nother conversation. That number is a lot fewer, but they're in the marketplace, and companies like ours who do system integration, the biggest can certainly assist and are a vital part of that. The bigger challenge is that it's not simply putting systems in. If all you do is put a system in and nobody knows how to use it, we're in trouble the day an adverse event happens. And so it's really getting institutional buy-in and institutional cultural shift to understand that it's important to care about these things. And in some ways, I think societally we've become a little lax about caring about some of these things. While every day, I think to some extent, we see these things every day on the news, and we've become inoculated to it a little until it actually happens close to home. And then we become hyper aware of it.
Cheryl, what would you say were your biggest challenges in putting together where you started and where you are today? It sounds like you were very successful in getting buy-off from stakeholders, which is probably one of the biggest challenges people face, is getting people on the same side and the same team going in the same direction. Was that your experience?
Well, when I joined in 2001, and started managing the emergency management part of my 3-hat job, the we were focused on earthquake preparedness. So and because of we had the Nisqually earthquake just in that year before I joined, and so in that sense, it was the event, and then, oh my gosh, what do we do if this happens again? So when we started building over the next 6 years, I looked for every opportunity to again bridge the conversation. Earthquake planning is hazard planning. Active shooter and other threats are hazards. We need to build a plan that will allow us to address our hazards across the board. I mean, every emergency manager takes, that approach of all hazard planning. They really do dovetail a lot. And so it was a lot of conversations, but let me tell you, it was aggravating. It was, frustrating in many ways. I had to, step aside from many conversations with unbelievers. There's a saying, I don't know, I guess it would be a meme now that always has been in my mind. As a lot of people in denial say, it won't happen here. But if you challenge them, then they'll say, well, if it does happen here, it won't be that bad. And then
Right.
you challenge that and they'll say, well, if it is that bad, it's not going to happen to me necessarily. And then you challenge that and they say, well, if it does happen here and it does happen to me and it is that bad, there's nothing we could have done about it anyways. And trying to have the conversations where you can address that. So what did I do? Yeah, I felt there was a lot of frustration, but over the years. But again, I tried to take that that position that I'm just picking up rocks, seashells, looking for that one that's going to be that gem where we have a good conversation and somebody gets it. And then I focused again, not on my ego. That quote you have about not taking the credit. Like I was happy if the IT guy was just like, oh, I had this great idea for security integration and technology. Great, let's do that. It is hard to set your ego aside. And I also recognize one other thing, Chad, that anybody listening here who believes in this may find frustrating. When we care and we learn about a subject, we become subject matter experienced or subject matter experts. But within our own organizations, you're never a prophet in your own company. So usually you have to go 3 to 5 miles outside of your area to find somebody that your institution will respect as an expert, and they'll give more credence to their voice. So I was pretty intentional about building in and bringing in as many other expert voices as possible. And then by being there with them, and when they would say gracious things like, oh, Cheryl said, and I agree with this, that credibility kind of latched on. And then when I started speaking again later after events like that, it carried more weight. So that's some of the tactics I used that were persuasive over the years. Also, I took advantage of every single incident that occurred on our campus to highlight what we could have done differently to respond had we had these security infrastructures in place. Now, whether you say this might have been a blessing in disguise, but we have a bank on campus that was robbed every 3 years like clockwork for the last 20 years. And because the bank was robbed, the robbers would bring, they brought a bomb once, they brought a gun a couple of times, there was a shootout, there was high-speed chase. And it was, right near the hub where the students are. So when I couldn't put the campus in lockdown for a lot of those years because we didn't have it in place. But they understood this bank robbery could have gotten bigger. And then I would use after action reports to highlight and kind of feed in a lot of this to the decision makers as well. And all of that with patience really led to the point where I was stunned. They were like, here's 2 million, go put it all in place. And like Eric said, like what I told them and what I tell others is that you really want a plan that will be sustainable. If you've ever bought a home brand new and all of your appliances are brand new, guaranteed in 10 years, all those appliances, your furnace, your fridge, your washer and dryer are all going to fail at the same time. Most of your security technology is very similar to that. They have their life expectancy. And so if you build in that sustainable plan, and this seems to be like magic to the budget people's ears, I don't want 2 million this year because in 10 years, you may not have another 2 million for me to fix all the things that broke. But this is the sustainable plan that will get us to that end goal. Oh, sorry, I'm kind of just downloading a bunch of the thought processes I had over the years that I felt like helped persuade our organization. And it wasn't just me, the director, Mark Reed at the time, who was here and was been here 20 years before me. So he was a strong proponent of this. And we also built on a relationship with Absco in particular, but there are, others as well, the company that does the our loudspeaker system. There's a lot of really good security integrators out there, but finding that one partner who's willing to hear you say, hey, that message was a little off point for this group of VPs. Would you work with me to develop, the talking points that they're going to really resonate with? Having that partner is invaluable. Like it absolutely is huge to be able to develop that rather than just kind of bring in somebody who's just going to talk and not work with you because of that end goal. They just want to sell something, and they don't care if they're in the end, if their product's going to work or not. I like to find people who also feel as strongly about saving lives as I do.
Yeah, Cheryl, I know early on and throughout the process, the other thing that you and Mark did really well was as systems were implemented and they had positive impact on adverse events, sharing those upline and, hey, had this gone wrong and we not have been able to intervene, the cost could have been fill in the blank. And some of those were pretty significant, the things that you were able to address proactively. So
Not that I recommend putting a bank on your campus, or but look for any situation where you can, like the school that Eric described that had the phones tied to their video tied to their blue phones for emergency calling, like anything like that, or what other institutions successes that are in the news that you're able to capitalize on and just say, hey, long term, this would be a great added safety feature. Being able to, it's not going to happen in the one and done. Just like your security master plan needs to be long term, your getting buy-in needs to be a long-term investment as well through those relationships and conversations.
Cheryl, well said. Thank you. Jen, I think we got about 3 minutes left, so we might have time for one last question.
You're correct. Anybody want to speak up? I still don't have any in the chat. People are being quiet. It's Monday.
Okay, fair enough. I will say this. I will close with this. The university that I spoke to that said that we're a gun-free zone, I found it fascinating that about 90 days later, one of their students was expelled for defending himself when a addict broke in to his on-campus apartment wielding a machete, and he pulled a gun. And so he was expelled for defending himself. Just absolutely fascinating, the mindset that we have when it comes to these things. And we can act like this is never going to happen here, or we can be proactive in and responsive in addressing the issues. A lot less expensive to address a system design when the building is being built or remodeled proactively than it is to address it after the fact and go in and retrofit everything. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I really want to thank Cheryl. Cheryl, I always enjoy my time with you, and you've become a national speaker at this point on these topics, and it's just such a joy to have you here. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Eric.